June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea, the tactical arena of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. A young signalman, barely 20 years old, braced himself against the relentless wind on the bridge wing of the USS Lexington, CV-16. He wasn't just observing a battle, he was immersed in the colossal, unstoppable culmination of American industrial power. Just 30 months prior, the Pacific Fleet had been burning at Pearl Harbor, a few broken vessels and a shattered morale. The United States had entered the war with a handful of precious, aging carriers, painfully slow to replace and desperately needed to fend off the initial, overwhelming Japanese thrust. The enemy, having calculated that the war of attrition would inevitably break the American will and exhaust its limited fleet, felt strategically confident. But this day was the resounding, thunderous answer to that calculated gamble. Spreading out to the eastern horizon, operating as a single, terrifying entity, was Task Force 58, the fastest and most formidable striking force the world had ever conceived. Its armored backbone was the newly designed, standardized Essex-class aircraft carrier. Look left, and there was the Hornet, CV-12, launching its heavy bombers. Look right, and the legendary Enterprise, CV-6, was nearby, but quickly followed by the Yorktown, CV-10, the Ticonderoga, CV-14, and a seemingly endless line of others still building speed below the skyline. These were not individual, unique ships, but a production run of nearly 30 interchangeable behemoths, a visible, tangible wave of steel forged in the sprawling slipways of Newport News and Bethlehem Steel. The sheer scale was the primary weapon itself. From the deck of Lexington, the air was filled with a continuous, terrifying, orchestrated chaos. A constant, uninterrupted stream of Hellcats, Helldivers, and Avengers was being launched, not from one or two precious flat-tops, but from a dozen simultaneous airfields. In mere minutes, they could put nearly 1,000 combat aircraft into the air, a devastating strike force that could overwhelm and annihilate an entire enemy air fleet before the Japanese command could even process the true extent of the attack. The Essex-class was the physical manifestation of the Two-Ocean Navy Act. They were fast enough to keep pace with the swift destroyers that screened them, large enough to carry nearly 100 aircraft, and armored enough to absorb crippling hits that would have sunk their older predecessors. It wasn't merely a ship, it was a factory of victory, a strategic answer to the vast, insurmountable geographical challenge of the Pacific. These floating fortresses were the true measure of American industrial resolve, providing a chilling, unmistakable preview of the modern superpower projection to come, a force capable of delivering decisive, overwhelming air power anywhere on the globe, an unbreakable steel foundation upon which the final victory would be built. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, was a devastating shock that instantly erased the U.S. Navy's strategic balance in the Pacific. While battleships lay disabled and sinking, the most critical loss was the pre-war fleet carrier strength. The subsequent naval battles of 1942, particularly the Coral Sea and Midway, saw the heroic but ultimately fatal sacrifice of crucial ships like the USS Lexington and USS Yorktown. The United States was suddenly left fighting a vast, two-front global war with an alarmingly small and constantly shrinking pool of operational carriers. It was clear that victory in the Pacific, a theater defined by massive ocean distances, depended entirely on air power, and air power required an endless supply of resilient, high-capacity floating airfields. The desperate need was not for a handful of specialized ships, but for an entire fleet of interchangeable, standardized carriers. The answer to this crisis was remarkably forged months before the war even reached American shores. Recognizing the growing global threat posed by the Axis powers, the U.S. Congress passed the Vinson-Trammell Act in July 1940, famously known as the Two-Ocean Navy Act. This single legislative act authorized the immediate, massive expansion of the U.S. fleet by an astonishing 70%. It was an unprecedented industrial mandate, effectively commissioning over 1 million tons of new warships, including the foundation for what would become the Essex-class. This immense strategic foresight proved indispensable, allowing America's massive industrial shipyards to begin laying down keels well before the Japanese bombs had even fallen. The United States was committing to a scale of naval production that history had never witnessed, transforming the nation's economy into the arsenal of democracy. The painful losses of earlier carriers provided naval architects with crucial, non-negotiable design lessons. The new design philosophy for the Essex-class abandoned the pre-war obsession with marginal speed increases or the limiting constraints of various international treaties. Instead, the focus shifted entirely to standardization, maximum durability, and sheer operational capacity. The Navy needed a design that could be built in huge numbers across multiple, geographically dispersed shipyards without major variations. The Essex design was a perfectly balanced synthesis, large enough to carry 90 or more combat aircraft, including the newly designed heavier dive bombers and torpedo planes, yet fast enough to operate seamlessly with the fleet's escort destroyers. This crucial standardization allowed for quicker battle repairs, easier crew cross-training, and, most importantly, the reliable, relentless flow of new ships from the yard straight into the active combat zone. The final, critical requirement for the Essex-class was its ability to sustain continuous, long-range operations deep within the remote Pacific. This demanded a design that maximized internal fuel capacity, aircraft ordnance storage, and expansive internal maintenance facilities. The Essex carriers were explicitly designed to be floating naval bases, capable of remaining at sea for weeks on end with minimal resupply and support. This commitment included installing powerful steam turbines capable of propelling the massive ships at over 33 knots and, crucially, adding layers of redundancy in both mechanical and damage control systems. While the PBY Catalina's rescue missions were necessary for human survival, the Essex-class represented the ultimate strategic solution: the ability to project overwhelming, sustained air power far across the Pacific, transforming the war of attrition into a devastating war of industrial annihilation. Unlike the heavy armored flight decks favored by the British Royal Navy, American naval architects made a crucial design compromise for the Essex-class. The main flight deck remained intentionally unarmored to save weight and maximize the ship's massive air capacity. Instead, they placed the heavy steel armor on the hangar deck just beneath it. This unique placement turned the hangar deck into the primary defensive shield for the vital internal machinery, fuel, and ordnance stores. While an unarmored flight deck was certainly vulnerable to bomb strikes, the design ensured that a hit would not automatically knock the carrier out of the entire fight. This choice underscored the prevailing U.S. doctrine: better to take a hit and keep fighting with a huge air wing, rather than sacrifice air superiority for thicker deck armor. A revolutionary feature that drastically improved operational efficiency was the strategic placement of one of the three elevators. Earlier carrier designs had placed all elevators in the center line, which frequently interfered with continuous landing and launch operations. The Essex-class boldly introduced a massive third elevator cantilevered off the starboard side of the ship. This single, critical innovation allowed the crew to move aircraft from the hangar deck to the flight deck without ever blocking the main landing or launch path. It provided an unparalleled increase in the speed of the deck cycle, meaning the ship could land, service, and rapidly relaunch its planes faster than any contemporary vessel, proving that superior design, not just size, was key to overwhelming the enemy. The sheer size and robust enclosure of the hangar deck was a defining feature of the floating fortress concept. This massive internal space was designed to act as an air-wing factory in motion. It was large enough to comfortably hangar nearly 100 aircraft and was equipped with extensive repair shops, welding stations, and vast parts storage facilities. This meant that damaged planes could be repaired, refueled, and rearmed safely below deck, protected from the weather and, most importantly, from the high explosive blast effects of enemy airstrikes. The hangar deck, powerfully reinforced by its surrounding armor belt and internal fire suppression systems, ensured that the carrier remained a functioning, self-sufficient air base, even after suffering significant external battle damage. Perhaps the most crucial element of the Essex's fortress reputation was its legendary, unmatched survivability. The entire design prioritized redundancy and extensive compartmentalization. The hull was meticulously divided into hundreds of separate, watertight compartments, ensuring that even catastrophic torpedo or mine hits would flood only small, isolated sections. Furthermore, all vital systems, such as the boilers and engine rooms, were isolated in separate, distant locations within the ship. This sheer resilience meant that while many Essex carriers took horrific damage, sustained bomb hits, repeated kamikaze strikes, and raging fires, not a single ship of the class was ever sunk during the course of the war. This ability to absorb punishment and remain aggressively operational was the true testament to the ship's design brilliance and the unflinching skill of the damage control crews. The most decisive factor in the Essex-class's dominance was not a single design feature but the sheer, brutal scale of its production. The initial, ambitious goal was to build 32 of these massive floating airfields. By the war's end, the United States had completed 24 fully operational Essex-class carriers, a feat of industrial output unmatched by any nation in history. Japan, in stark and desperate contrast, managed to complete only 6 equivalent fleet carriers during the entire same period. This crushing disparity in numbers meant that whenever an Essex carrier was damaged, the U.S. Navy had 2 more ready, or soon ready, to take its place. This rapid mass production transformed naval warfare from a rare duel of individual, precious ships into a relentless, one-sided war of industrial attrition, a battle the Japanese Empire could never hope to win. The immense construction task for these giants was meticulously distributed across America's greatest shipyards, including the sprawling facilities of Newport News Shipbuilding and the various yards of Bethlehem Steel. These critical facilities were ruthlessly transformed into high-volume assembly lines. Workers utilized advanced prefabrication techniques, building massive, multi-deck hull sections off-site and then quickly welding them together directly on the slipway. This streamlined, methodical technique drastically cut overall construction time. Shipyards embraced a perfectly standardized blueprint, ensuring that a damage control crew working on the Intrepid, CV-11, could instantly and familiarity understand the structure of the Bunker Hill, CV-17. The dedication of the vast American workforce, the unwavering victory shift mentality, was legendary, turning hundreds of thousands of tons of raw steel into operational warships with dizzying, terrifying speed. The sheer speed at which these ships were constructed became both a powerful propaganda tool and a horrifying operational reality for the enemy command. While specialized pre-war carriers often took 3 to 4 years to complete, the average construction time for an Essex carrier was ruthlessly reduced to under 2 years. The USS Franklin, CV-13, a notable example, was launched just 16 months after its keel was first laid down. This rapid, continuous turnaround meant that the painful losses suffered by the U.S. Navy in 1942 were swiftly and overwhelmingly replaced by superior, larger, and significantly tougher ships starting in late 1943. Every few months, a brand new, fully operational Essex carrier joined the fleet, completely overwhelming the Japanese capacity to destroy or even effectively track the incoming armada. The ability to churn out these assembly line titans provided the United States with an insurmountable logistical and strategic superiority. When Japanese pilots bravely sacrificed themselves to sink or damage an American carrier, they knew their nation would struggle for years to replace their own losses. Conversely, the American fleet could absorb massive, tragic casualties and yet emerge demonstrably stronger and better equipped the very next month. The Essex-class demonstrated conclusively that the ultimate, defining weapon in the Pacific was not the ship's armor or the plane's speed, but the unrivaled industrial might of the American home front that tirelessly birthed them. These carriers were the steel-plated testament to a nation's ability to mobilize resources faster and more effectively than any adversary in human history. The Essex-class was never intended to fight alone. Its true, terrifying power was fully realized as the backbone of the fast carrier task force. This force was known alternately as Task Force 58 or Task Force 38. This entire grouping was a revolutionary strategic concept. Instead of risking precious carriers individually, the Navy strategically grouped multiple Essex carriers together. This massive concentration of air power was then shielded by fast, powerful support vessels, including the new Iowa-class battleships, heavy cruisers, and dozens of destroyers. The task force was an immense, self-contained, and highly mobile striking platform. It could maneuver quickly, absorb devastating damage, and, most importantly, deliver an overwhelming punch wherever needed across the vast, empty Pacific. The coordinated strike capability of Task Force 58 was absolutely unprecedented in naval history. Once enemy targets, be they heavily fortified Japanese islands, coastal shore installations, or critical surface fleets, were identified, the entire force would launch an alpha strike. This involved launching a massive, synchronized wave of aircraft from multiple Essex decks simultaneously. The tactical goal was simple, instant, complete air superiority and total saturation of the target area. A typical strike might involve 200 to 300 aircraft hitting a single, concentrated target area within minutes. This overwhelming force crushed the Japanese capacity for defense, often crippling entire enemy fleets and island bases before they could even mount any effective counterattack, dramatically shortening the brutal duration of the war. Despite their immense offensive might, the carriers themselves remained the most critical and strategically vulnerable assets. Protecting them was the complex defensive screen, or the hedgehog, formed by the escort ships. This defensive screen provided overlapping, mutually supporting layers of anti-aircraft (AA) fire. Destroyers tightly ringed the formation, providing crucial close-in protection and acting as plane guards to rescue any downed pilots. Further out, cruisers and powerful battleships, like the colossal USS New Jersey, added massive, high-altitude AA barrages. This collective defensive fire proved exceptionally effective at simply decimating incoming Japanese strike waves, famously leading to the devastating losses suffered by Japanese aviation during the infamous Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The final, crucial element of the fast carrier doctrine was the concept of operational endurance. To maintain relentless, continuous pressure on the Japanese enemy, the task force had to stay at sea for weeks on end, often operating thousands of miles from the nearest friendly supply base. This seemingly impossible feat was achieved through the revolutionary practice of underway replenishment, UNREP. Fuel tankers, ammunition ships, and supply vessels would pull alongside the carriers in the open ocean, refueling and rearming them while both fleets were still powerfully moving. This logistical ability to continuously sustain operations meant the Essex carriers could project their immense, concentrated power without ever ceding the initiative back to the desperately struggling enemy. The ultimate demonstration of the Essex-class's overwhelming power came in June 1944 during the pivotal Battle of the Philippine Sea. This engagement was instantly, and chillingly, nicknamed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese naval commanders threw virtually their entire remaining carrier air wing against the might of Task Force 58. What followed was a massacre of unprecedented scale. The superior Hellcat fighters, launched in overwhelming droves from the dozen Essex decks, systematically tore through the incoming Japanese planes. Due to the superior radar systems, which the Essex was specifically designed to carry, and better trained pilots, the American carriers suffered minimal damage. The Japanese, however, lost nearly 400 aircraft in a single devastating day. This battle was arguably the most strategically decisive single event of the entire carrier war. The Essex-class did not merely win a battle, they effectively eliminated Japan's trained naval air power as an operational threat for the rest of the conflict. The constant, high-volume combat operations enabled by the Essex's massive hangars and rapid deck cycles ensured that American pilots maintained a crushing superiority in combat experience. After the Marianas, Japan's remaining carriers were largely rendered strategically irrelevant, completely lacking the necessary trained pilots and planes to pose any serious, coordinated threat. The floating fortresses had definitively achieved total and complete air superiority across the Central Pacific. 4 months later, the Essex fleet played the central, complex role in the decisive Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, which remains the largest naval battle in history. The Essex carriers were primarily tasked with crippling the Japanese center force as it attempted to break into the Leyte invasion beaches. Crucially, Admiral Halsey used the bulk of the Essex carriers to pursue the Japanese northern force, the decoy carriers. Although a point of later controversy, This massive commitment of force decimated the last operational Japanese carriers at the battle off Cape Engano, confirming the permanent fate of their naval aviation forever. By the pivotal close of 1944, the Essex-class and its task force had achieved peak operational maturity. The ships were not only robust pieces of engineering, they were now run by highly professional, battle-hardened crews. Damage control teams were expert and practiced, deck handling was smooth and rapid, and the combined air strikes were delivered with devastating, relentless precision. The constant speed, overwhelming numbers, and superb tactical coordination of the Essex fleet had decisively shifted the entire momentum of the Pacific War, ensuring that American power would absolutely dominate the sea lanes from that point forward until the final surrender. As the war progressed into late 1944 and 1945, the Essex-class carriers transitioned from being primary striking platforms to being the primary, high-value targets for the desperate Japanese kamikaze attacks. These were suicide missions designed explicitly to bypass all defensive screens and deliver crippling, explosive blows directly to the flight deck. The kamikaze pilots knew that the destruction of a single Essex carrier represented a massive psychological and strategic victory. The sheer frequency and ferocity of these attacks tested the absolute limits of the carrier's structural resilience, turning the final campaigns into a harrowing, month-long test of steel, specialized armor, and human endurance. Despite facing this new, terrifying weapon head-on, the Essex carriers demonstrated their immense structural integrity time and again. Ships like the USS Franklin, CV-13, and USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, sustained what should have been fatal, sinking damage. Franklin was struck by two bombs that ignited her fully fueled and armed aircraft on the flight deck, causing devastating, uncontrollable explosions. Bunker Hill took two immediate, direct kamikaze hits in rapid succession. These carriers absorbed massive internal explosions, raging infernos that melted tons of deck steel, and gaping holes in their structures. Yet, due to the segmented armored hangar deck and the meticulously compartmentalized hull, they always managed to stay powerfully afloat and often continued to limp towards safety, ultimately refusing to sink. The single most critical factor that guaranteed the survival of the Essex carriers was not just the quality of the steel, but the unwavering skill and heroism of the damage control (DC) teams. These sailors were, quite rightly, the Navy's ultimate unsung heroes. Operating deep below the flight deck in smoke-filled, burning, and flooded compartments, they fought relentlessly against the sea and the spreading fire. They quickly shored up weakened bulkheads, sealed ruptured, flooded sections, extinguished massive aviation fuel fires, and expertly restored critical power. Their speed and technical expertise in preventing cascading internal failure, where one internal disaster leads to another, saved every single ship in the class that suffered a major attack, proving that human determination and training was the final, indispensable layer of defense. The Essex-class's combat record remains unparalleled and definitive. Despite repeated, severe damage from bombs, torpedoes, and kamikazes, not a single Essex-class carrier was lost to enemy action during the entire course of World War II. This incredible, almost unbelievable survivability confirmed the genius of the original design philosophy, a pragmatic willingness to risk the flight deck to absolutely protect the vital machinery below. It ensured that the United States Navy not only maintained its numerical superiority but its operational superiority throughout the most intense and desperate years of the Pacific Campaign, cementing the Essex carrier's reputation as the most durable and unstoppable workhorse of the modern era. The end of World War II did not mark the end of the Essex class. Instead, it immediately ushered in their most demanding technological challenge, the jet age. The original straight-deck design, perfectly suited for propeller aircraft, was suddenly and dangerously obsolete. Early jet fighters were significantly faster, substantially heavier, and required much longer landing and launch runs than the decks could safely accommodate. Attempting to operate early jets like the F-9F Panther on the original, narrow Essex decks proved highly dangerous and inefficient. To survive this immense technological leap and remain strategically relevant in the escalating Cold War, the venerable carriers required massive, immediate, and expensive modernization. The Navy swiftly initiated two comprehensive modernization efforts, labeled SCB-27 and SCB-125. The initial SCB-27 program added crucial elements needed for jet operation: stronger, enclosed bows, more powerful steam catapults, and more robust elevators. However, the true transformation came with the SCB-125 conversion, which introduced the defining feature of all modern carriers, the angled flight deck. This simple yet brilliant innovation allowed aircraft that missed the arresting wires to safely throttle up and take off again, a maneuver known as a bolter, without endangering parked planes at the bow. This single modification saved the entire Essex-class from premature retirement and guaranteed their operational service for another 2 crucial decades. Equipped with angled decks, reinforced catapults, and stronger arresting gear, the modernized Essex carriers proved they were still the Navy's most dependable workhorse. They immediately formed the operational backbone of the fleet during the Korean War, flying thousands of intense sorties to support embattled ground troops under incredibly harsh conditions. Later, in the difficult campaigns of the Vietnam War, carriers like the USS Oriskany and USS Hancock continued to launch squadrons of F-8 Crusaders and A-4 Skyhawks. The powerful sight of these World War I-era ships launching the era's cutting-edge jet fighters into combat was a profound testament to the foresight of their original design and the success of the comprehensive post-war modernization. The last operational Essex-class carrier, the USS Lexington, CV-16, finally retired in 1991, concluding an unparalleled half-century of continuous, active service. Though they were ultimately replaced by the nuclear-powered supercarriers of the Forrestal and Nimitz classes, the Essex carriers had fundamentally established the core doctrine for all modern carrier warfare. They proved the tactical value of the angled deck, the essential nature of the integrated task force operation, and the strategic importance of a standardized, mass-produced fleet. The floating fortresses were not just ships of war. They were the steel foundation upon which the United States built its identity as the 20th century's dominant maritime superpower.